Hi, and welcome to the Anti-Waffle podcast with me, M. Belshel-Naylor, and Marva Gregorio de Souza.
Hello.
And together we will try to talk about research without any gobbledygook. Each episode we'll be talking to a researcher who will discuss the work they're doing, looking at why this research is important, and asking how the hell did they get into this field. We hope that it will be informative and interesting and bring a bit of the academic world into the real world. This week we have Jenny Shan, based at UCLPartners. Hi Jenny, and welcome. Thank you very much for being here today for talking about your research. It's great. Would you like to start to tell us a bit about your research?
Yes, so I am at the moment talking to carers, that's unpaid carers, to understand more about their skills and educational needs. So the NHS spends an awful lot of money on patient education and very little on carer education. Yet we know that the role that those people play in the lives of the person they support, in the way of preventing and sort of supporting the health and social care system by changing the needs you have of staff, is phenomenal. And what we're trying to understand through this research is what are the skills and educational needs that carers have and how could we better meet them.
I know that you mentioned there was sort of the training and the things that they can access at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, what sort of things would they be accessing? I know that's what you're asking them, but what sort of things?
I mean, it's very inconsistent. So it is very much a postcode lottery of what are the very active community groups that provide educational support at the moment. So there is a reliance on the voluntary sector. It might be that somebody's going to a carer support group and they're getting informal advice from other peers about how to deal with certain circumstances. There's a lot of access to support when you recognise you are a carer in terms of the financial support you can get. And then there's also specific trainings people do that have been promoted through those carer support groups or promoted through certain voluntary groups, which might be around basic first aid or handling skills.
Okay. And are you dealing with a whole range of carers? Is there sort of something defining the carers that you're looking at?
Yeah, so we originally looked at older people caring for other older people, which in part came off the back of work we were doing with Age UK, understanding what matters most to people in retirement and as you're ageing. That research was to look at the differences between that and somebody of working age with a long-term condition to demonstrate that actually as over the life course your priorities and preferences change. So we originally were looking at older carers caring for other carers, caring for other older people. But in time, because of the relevance of this piece more broadly, we've expanded our cohort to be all adults caring for other people, and we've had a focus on caring for other older people rather than caring on children. But that we have included some interviews with people caring for children as well, to make sure that we're not missing key themes from that exclusion. What we have done from a research perspective is excluded young carers, and in part there are ethical implications and complicated processes we'd need to go through to include them. But also there's a very different support needed for that cohort, and it's probably unlikely that the generalisable results we want to get from this will be applicable to young carers.
And where do you, once you finish the research, because I work on it too.
Marva leads it. Marva's leading the recruitment of all of our carers and doing the interviews, so extensive work on it, Marva.
So do you want to just explain to everyone where you want to end up? What would be the ideal scenario once you've got all the information in?
So the ideal scenario would be to have some really consistent themes about how could we better support carers. So if the educational needs came out of these interviews, we could actually package them into different materials, that would be fantastic. So if there's consistency in what people would like help with, that's, I guess as a researcher, you sort of sample to saturation because you want to find those consistent themes that come out of it. So that would be one thing, that there's consistent bits that we can then build solutions for. And I think secondly, that we can help to stimulate a broader conversation about what it means to be a carer. What we're learning through these interviews is that the journey to being a carer is very different. For some, it's instant. Your wife has a stroke. Overnight, you've now got a job as a carer. You're completely ill-prepared for that. You've got broader emotional contexts at play. Or it might be that you are caring for your parents. They gradually deteriorate over multiple years. They end up living next door to you or living with you, and your caring responsibilities gradually increase. And you don't have a pinpoint section of, on this date I realised I was a carer. So we are learning that the journey to being a carer is very different for different people, and I think being able to articulate that will be very useful. We had particular insight from an interview we were doing 2 weeks ago, where the individual said that actually recognising yourself as a carer is a really challenging thing to do. It's important because it gives you access to financial and other support, but it changes your relationship. So if you are a wife, you want to be, it's your husband, and it's not somebody you're caring for. And the minute you put that label on, there are some interesting dynamics that might come out. So I think there's some really interesting lessons coming out from that, which I'm really keen to share and explore more broadly.
Right. Because like with one of the interviews that I was doing, and she was she first cared for her husband, and then now she's got her own issues, and so she's now being cared for by her daughters. And so it's like she was saying that, because I was interviewing her from the perspective as her when she was a carer, and she was saying that she understands it now. She understands what her husband was going through and how it felt for him to be cared for by someone. And she goes like, maybe she would have been a little bit more patient, or a little bit more, not so, because like sometimes he wouldn't ask for things or wouldn't say things, and so then she'd just get frustrated because he wouldn't just ask. But now she's the one who's sort of like the quotes, the burden. So now she understands, oh right, but I remember what it was like, so no, I better just say, or I better just, this is much better to just be honest about what you need rather than, try and be helpful or kind or whatever. But yes, but one of the things she did say was like, if you don't care, don't care. And because it's hard. It's a hard job. And some of the people that we've been interviewing, it's just when you hear their stories and the way that they've given up their life for someone else, it's unbelievable.
And like you say, it's that change in relationship must be really hard. If you go from being husband to wife to suddenly having to care for them and dealing with the emotions you're having to deal with as a carer and trying to redefine how you are, it must be really, really hard. So you do need a big support, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
To access it. So how did you recruit people to interview for your carers?
So we did multiple avenues. Firstly, we worked a lot with the third sector, so carers at Barking Dagenham, for example, have been fantastic and really active in giving us access to their support groups. So they're people that have acknowledged they are a carer and go to a regular support group. So we've been there, we've interviewed people through that. When we first set up the programme, we were also interested in whether people from the general public had different needs from those that are working in health and social care, recognising that even if you're not doing a health care delivery role, you're not a professional in health services, you still have understanding of what the health and social care system does, even if you just work in organisations administratively or doing a different support function. And so we also went through NELF, North East London Foundation Trust, which is a huge mental health and community provider in East London, and has 6,000 staff. So given that 1 in 5 people are going to be a carer at some point in their lives, 1 in 9 are a carer at any one point, our assumption was there's a big proportion of those 6,000 people who have a caring role. So we also recruited through NELFT to give us that contrasting perspective, and we've had some fantastic interviews with people in a range of roles, from administrative staff to district nurses, sharing on how their professional insights have given them a different view of what's needed in a caring role. But not to say that you know everything, and there are still things that when you're experiencing it as a carer, it's a very different experience from when you're experiencing it from a professional side. What we have found from that cohort is there is a much bigger pool for support for time out and for sort of respite, whereas from the general public there's a lot of calls so far. We can't preempt answers coming over about sort of needs for basic caregiving knowledge. So we are seeing that contrast. So carers at Barking Dagenham sort of to access our general public carer cohort, and then Marva's done additional recruitment through social media and Carers UK and other voluntary sector organisations, and then also through NELF to get that sort of contrasting perspective of a health and social care provision.
One of the biggest challenges has been trying to, because of course the carers that we're interviewing the way where we found them all, it's through places where they're getting some kind of support.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, what about the ones who aren't already connected in, who maybe haven't acknowledged themselves as a carer? And so how do we reach them? How do we get in touch with those and bring them in so we've got a wider perspective? But then, or does it matter? Is it important?
And I think it probably is important, and I guess we're learning. Marva and I've got a pile of transcripts to wade through, and we'll learn from that about our sampling strategy and whether we've got the right balance of people. So, for example, the example I alluded to earlier of the stroke piece, there are more of those in the system that we could access through our health partners. And once we review about the sort of 50 interviews we've done to date of our anticipated 80, we will look at our next round of sampling, and if needs be, we'll target areas where we feel that we haven't got representation of carers.
And is there a point when people become defined as a carer? That must be quite hard to sort of actually for people to recognise themselves, as you said, recognise themselves as carers. But is there a point? Is there an actual definition? Because I wouldn't know if I was just caring for somebody. I'm trying to think of an example. If somebody's had a stroke, so that's quite obvious, and they can sort of become their carer and you know what you're doing. But other people, it must be more of a gradual process. People, maybe the partner's becoming older and frailer, and sort of goes from just sort of everyday help to suddenly realising that they actually need some help in helping this person. Is that right? Is there a point when it becomes very clear that you're a carer?
So it's an interesting question. I think it's different for people versus for the system. So there obviously is policy around how to support unpaid carers. There's sort of definitions in the Care Act that are a point at which you would be eligible for getting financial support, for example, and carers allowance. However, I think for the individuals, from what we've heard to date, I don't think it's translated into a very binary, I'm now a carer, I wasn't last week. And I do think those that have that really gradual journey of increasing hours, increasing functions of support they're giving to the individual they care for, are tipping into being a carer that would be defined as a carer in some of our national policy documents without recognising it.
Yeah, because it could be they're doing the role, not realising themselves that there is that help out there. Yeah, so it's part, you probably cover this later, but it's part of this project, is there some way to sort of advertise to people out there that there is this support and training available?
Yeah, we hope so. And we're working closely with Care City, which is an innovation centre in East London based in Barking. They trial and test lots of really fascinating innovations across sort of health and social care worlds. And we are looking to them to help us to start testing tools for how would you educate carers. And the hope is that if some of those innovations seem to be beneficial and helpful in filling some of these educational gaps that we're beginning to uncover in our interviews, that there would be routes to try and advertise actually access to this support. Ideally, we will get that as cost effective as possibly, and therefore it wouldn't be a barrier to anyone accessing those kind of pieces. But we are looking really broadly about modern educational access and delivery. So looking at apps, looking at online tools, looking at online videos, and other ways of getting information really digestible to the frontline user. I think the way that we've approached patient education historically was very much a come in, be spoken to for an hour, go home and reflect on it, come back for a 12-week period or what have you. And that's changing, and now we are getting people who are innovators around self-management, of helping people to learn about how to take control of their own conditions, and they're doing that through multiple tools, not through that sort of didactic sit and learn process. And so we're really trying to build on the reform in educational delivery as well, as this gap around how do we support unpaid carers. And I think that access is key, because a big thing we have heard is taking time out as a carer is really challenging. Taking time out for yourself is really important but very seldom done. And people have described it being a challenge to go to an educational session that was a half day, because what do they do with the person they care for? And some of the voluntary organisations recognise that, and they have mechanisms to look after that person while you're having your educational training session or what have you. But what we're really looking at is reflecting that in the models that we use. So let's think about more sort of remote access to education, rather than it all being a come here, sit there, go home, as it were.
And did you say it's 80 interviews you're hoping to
Yeah,
carry?
we may well get saturation before that, and ideally that would be the case. But looking about the breadth of who is a carer, so it's a huge cohort. In the UK at the moment there are 6.5 million carers, and if you think that, as I mentioned earlier, 1 in 5 people will be a carer at some point in their lives, 1 in 9 is at the moment. Every day 6,000 new people become carers, whether they realise they are or not. That's happening. There's a massive spectrum of who these people are, of their educational backgrounds, of their social context, of the people they're caring for. Are they caring for somebody with predominantly sort of mobility issues, or somebody with sort of more cognitive impairment, so dementia or other pieces, and so there's a big spectrum of the perspectives, and we recognise that you speak to one person, and we're very much wanting to listen to their story and their perspectives. So in order to try and listen to people with those different contexts, we have to interview a lot of people. And so the sort of a back of the envelope statistical suggestion is that we're looking for about 80. But we are continuing to read and reflect and code our transcripts as we go, so that we can really see, is there value, have we got consistent themes now, is there value in opening up to even more interviews or not?
And am I right in saying the project started in April 2016? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. It was slightly paused because I went on maternity leave for a while, so there was a pause in progress, and it's been reignited through Marva's enthusiasm, which is fantastic too.
Cool. And has it got an end date? Or is it,
Yeah, we're hoping to complete by July, partly because we want to get going on some of those solutions, and we don't want the solutions to preempt the findings that we get, so we want to make sure that we've got these insights to drive the solutions rather than that the two happen in parallel. We've also got an opportunity to share our work at the Health Services Research UK conference in July, so for us that's a really helpful milestone of making sure we've finished our coding and sort of thematic analysis, so that we've got results to share. Also for the participants, we'd be really keen to be able to sort of thank them and share back some of the lessons we've had, because we have also heard that hearing about perspectives of others is really valuable and interesting to them too, so we're keen to make sure we can get that back to them as soon as possible.
Everyone who I've interviewed has really, they sound like they've valued the opportunity to just sort of like talk out what they've been going through and everything. And it was like, and what you were saying about like needing the break and needing the time for themselves. But I remember one of the women who I was speaking to, and she cares for her daughter, who doesn't live with her, who's actually married now, but she has a mental health issue where she kind of, I can't remember what it was called, but she has the sort of like panic attacks sort of things, and so she has to, but she only goes to her mum about them, and so it's like, so even though she's not living with her, she'll get calls from her sort of like in the middle of the night and saying, I don't know what to do, what's happening, or and it's, and so so even if she does go away, she's always interrupted, she's always caring, so even if she's not, when she's not with her, she's going to get a call, or if her daughter has her episodes and has a bad one, she will come back and stay with her mum again, and it's like, it's so it's humbling to hear them. It really is. It's just like, and you just wonder, well, would I do it? Would I? Yeah, would you? I know I would. I hope. But
and your parents, you do it all the time. Your daughter calls you any time.
Yes, she does. Yeah. Sometimes I answer.
Okay, we'll change that now. So, changing slightly, but sort of how did you get to where you are now? How did you, sort of your career path build up to
doing this research? Interesting question. Very complicated, I guess. I mean, I have always had a passion for health and social care, and I did philosophy at university, which helps you to be reflective but doesn't lead into any profession, and then worked in consultancy for years, really learning a lot about health and social care reform, different organisations and different countries that have done it really well. I spent a lot of time with the NHS, and that was my particular focus. I had a bit of a values clash of finding it a bit uncomfortable that our taxpayers' money was paying for a day rate that I certainly wasn't receiving. So thought that I'd rather sort of support reform from within the NHS rather than alongside. And I spent a bit of time trying to get some experience and exposure to things that could help me do that best. So I worked as a policy researcher at the King's Fund, which was a great eye-opener into sort of the policy narrative and what's happening across the NHS. From that perspective, one of the big things at the time, this is a long time ago now, was in cancer waiting times and some of the reform of the NHS Plan 2000, and actually that the delivery of that, the incentives in the system were actually driving different behaviours from what they wanted to achieve. So I spent some time as a cancer manager at Guy's and St Thomas's, which was amazing, sort of frontline experience to understand about, why is it so difficult to get stuff done in health and social care systems. And actually, there's a lot of people that work really hard, and it is not always the easiest system to mobilise action in. I then went back to consultancy services and stepped out again to do Masters in Public Health at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And I guess from this side, that was my big opening into research and the value and opportunity for it. For me, it really broadened my horizons on what is health. And that social context and how important that is. And then I had the opportunity to come and join UCLP as we were first forming, which was super exciting. And I think my sort of past experience around it, particularly I had work around integrated care that was really relevant as we were starting as an organisation of tertiary academic hospitals and a university, actually having that system perspective on what you need to mobilise action for the population, who are the partners you need around you to do that, was really helpful. And we rapidly expanded our membership to include all health and social care partners, either formally or informally. And the work I do now at Care City is very much about how do we bring research to East London in a way that it doesn't have access to because it's not on the doorstep of some of these big towers, and how do we really think about the social context of the population, how do we work differently with the councils and with carers and the general public as well, about making sure that what we deliver is responsive to that need. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm also doing a bit more formal research because I'm doing a PhD at the moment, and that's partly because I do lots of grant-funded activity and lots of research, but until I've got some credibility in the academic world, I cannot be a PI of my own. So that's a future ambition I have, to continue sort of this inquiry level and contributing to knowledge and dissemination. So it's sort of a dual track.
So for those of you who don't know Jenny, she is such a powerhouse. It's like you're as soon as anyone says, "Oh, can you? Do you know?" and it's like, there it is, and it's and you just produce. Do you not find it extremely frustrating working with the NHS because it's like almost the polar opposite to you?
Compliments get you everywhere. It is frustrating, but I think there's so much opportunity, and I also think there's a huge human factor. We haven't touched on this, but maybe it's worth, if we've got time, about really what motivates all of us and why we're doing our job. And I think I feel really lucky in my role because I have freedom and flexibility to do things that really interest me. So this carer research project is, to be honest, the brainchild of Mike Roberts in part. He listened to Radio 4 where they had a piece talking about how much money we spend on patient education and we spend nothing on care education. And I was like, ooh, good line, that's super interesting, and found out more about it. And together he and I went to QMUL Research Ethics Committee to get approval to do this research work. And that, is in itself an example of the value of UCLP, that you were just surrounded by really interesting people that can give you insights and stimulate fantastic opportunities. So Mike Roberts, I'm forever indebted to for this piece and many other pieces of interesting work we've done together. But I think it's understanding about the motivation of people. And when we did this research project, what I was really keen was to make sure that our staff within UCLPartners had an opportunity to be grounded in, as Marva's described, the humbling voice of the public. And I did some work with Age UK, interviewing over 75-year-olds about what matters most to them, and I found it an incredibly valuable part of time. So you can be really busy churning out board documents, making important recommendations or suggestions to on strategy and all sorts of the great and the good, but actually spending time to listen to people and what matters to them is what really drives my motivation. And it's really hard to get it done in your right mind when the system is depressingly slow and stuck sometimes. But actually, for me, projects like this keep my motivation alive about why we're here and why we're doing it. And opening that out, so Marv has been fabulous, and we had a group of we had a group of willing volunteers from across UCLP that did our first tranche of 25 interviews, and I hope that they got some benefit from it too, of actually listening to the public. And when you're not I'm not a clinician, and if you're not seeing patients on a regular basis, the amount of examples you have at your hand to remind you and to drive your work are much less. So I'm really enjoying participating in work like this that helps you to remember why we're doing this and what can we do differently and what can be better. And we have ambitions in Care City that everybody spends time with the public, doing either interesting pieces of research that they've come up with, or participating in some of our ethnographic work or some of our other established research programs, just so that we can keep that grounding in why we do this and what do we do this for, and how do we make sure that we're not just doing something that's dictated, but doing something that's really pulled by the public.
Now, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, and you could go back many years, is there like an alternative career? Is there something you wanted to be that's completely different?
I guess the only thing for me was I had a sliding doors moment as a kid. So I used to do a lot of art, and I still do a lot of painting and things. And I applied to Oxford to do philosophy, and I was also going to do a foundation course in art and then go and do art. And I sort of had this polarised decision making that if I got into Oxford to do philosophy, that was the sensible thing to do, because that would be an academic career, and then all doors would open from there. And if I didn't get in, forget all other options, I would go and be an artist as I kind of wanted to be. And my dad still has a debate about it, because he was like, it's actually really disappointing that you went to Oxford. I'm like, anyway, so that is my sliding doors bit. So that's totally different from this. I wouldn't have been in health and social care work. I might have been doing painting and living on baked beans and sitting in a shed somewhere, but having fun. Who knows? Maybe I'll get back to that in my retirement. That might be my second life. Who knows?
Can you sort of sum up sort of how important it is, and then maybe sort of what you hope to get out of it, so that the public knows exactly what to get in this project?
So I think this research is really important because there are a lot of people being carers, and what they do for us is fantastic, and what they do for the people they care for is fantastic. And I'm really keen that we help them to be more prepared and more equipped in that role. So most people tell you they didn't choose to be a carer, they've gradually become one, whether that be through life circumstances like a stroke or be through a gradual ageing process. So I hope that we will help people to be better equipped in that, uninterviewed and unapplied for role, as it were. I think what we also hope this study will do is to really understand about what are the needs, rather than just putting different solutions out there. And I think sometimes we do, both from a policy and from a system perspective, jump to solutions without really pausing to say, but what would be most beneficial? So I hope, secondly, that we will actually get really targeted pieces that listen to and respond to the insights we've heard from carers. And already we've had some very concrete pieces coming out. We've had a few people who are talking about their care experience retrospectively, who've supported someone who has now died. And some of that end-of-life care education is really important, and it's not something you want the minute you realise you're a carer. It's something you need the day that you are caring for someone that's dying, how to keep their mouth hygienic, not giving them water because it will make them choke, etc. Are lessons that people in retrospect really wish they'd had access to, but wouldn't have wanted it too early. So I hope as well that they'll be really tailored to when it matters, and that the educational format for that will be tailored. So that wouldn't be a half day missing out on supporting your loved one passing away, but it might be a 2-minute YouTube video that shows you how to do X, Y, and Z. So again, making sure that our results are really targeted.
On that same thing, I think as well how it helps the public, the research we're doing, is because I think if we didn't have the people caring for their family members, I think the system would collapse. I think that if the NHS and if the local councils had to pay for the care that all the 6.5 million people are doing,
Yeah.
the system would collapse.
So the Carers UK infographic has shown an estimate that would be £119 billion per year that carers are saving our system.
Wow.
So Mummy, you're quite right, it would collapse.
Yeah.
And so it is incredibly
Need to
important.
look
And I
after
hope for the public, it is seen as a positive piece that we're doing, that we're grounded in trying to help them. And it's not more complicated than that, I don't think.
And if people wanted to find out more, is there a website or anywhere they should
Well, we hope that imminently there will be a results report that we will publish widely. So around July, we hope to be sharing the results of this. I'm always contactable, so my email address is on UCLP and Care City website. So very happy for people to get in touch to talk about it further. Also really keen to look at collaborations. We recognise we're not the only ones that recognise that carers matter. So if there are people who are linked to other research programmes or other pieces, then always happy to talk about that too and see where we can join up and maximise our impact by joining forces as well.
Back to you.
Yeah, and we did a very initial blog on the Care City website when we first did the first tranche of 25 interviews, which we can put the link to as well.
Okay, brilliant.
Excellent.
Well, thank you very much. It's
Thank
been great.
you.
Thank you for your
Thank you for your
time.
time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much to everyone for listening. We'll put links up on our website, which is www.antiwafflepodcast.wordpress.com, and it will be on our Twitter account, which is @antiwafflepod. Please do get in touch, as we'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.